This video is sponsored by World Anvil. Ever since the 1970s, D&D has been using the same 6 stats for their characters: strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. The goal was to essentially subdivide the human experience into manageable categories that could essentially cover anything you could expect to come up in a D&D game. And of course, because human beings are more complicated than game statistics would make them out to be, and because different words have different connotations, this is a subject that can lead to a lot of nuanced and complicated discussions. And as a result, D&D's stats have been the source of a lot of debates and discourse over the past 50 years. For example, how do you play characters who are more intelligent or wise or charismatic than you are? What does it mean to have low scores? What does that mean for how you play your character? What do some of these words even mean as far as how they affect your character in day-to-day life? There was even a brief effort to introduce a 7th stat, comeliness, to try to define charisma as a way of describing how you interact with other people, separate from the idea of physical attractiveness, which could be covered by a different stat. And so, of course, as we're currently in the middle of a little bit of a gaming renaissance, where all these other role-playing games are being given more space and attention to compete for D&D's audience a little bit, a lot of designers are rethinking which stats make the most sense for their game. And so along came Daggerheart, and they do still have 6 characteristics to sum up your character, but these stats have new names and a different range of bonuses than what we typically get in D&D. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, because it seems to me that some of the choices in Daggerheart are specifically designed to cut through some of these debates that have been raging in the D&D community for literally half a century. And as a nice little bonus, Daggerheart's approach to stats sort of serves as a retroactive defense against one of the more persistent forms of criticism that was leveled against a character from Campaign 1 of Critical Role. But we'll get there. If you're enjoying these Daggerheart videos I've been putting out, please let me know in the comments below and subscribe to the channel. I have more D&D videos I want to make in the future as well, but I also have a bunch of Daggerheart videos in the pipeline, and I would love to know if the audience is interested in watching those, because I think this is an exciting time to talk about new games and share some fun opinions about them. So if you want to watch more Daggerheart videos, let me know in the comments, because I have a ton more to say about this game. Thank you so much, and now, on with the show. First of all, let's talk about the new names that are used for the Daggerheart stats, because most of them are just the same idea as the stats for D&D. Like, most of the 6 Daggerheart stats have a clear corresponding partner in the D&D stats. But by choosing new names for them, you're sort of redefining the definitions a little bit. And indeed, when each stat is listed in the book, it's paired with some additional terms to help clarify its meaning. For example, we still have strength, but now it's paired with the descriptions lift, smash, and grapple. That's very useful as a way to essentially define what strength covers in Daggerheart, especially because there are no skills in Daggerheart. So instead of rolling for specific skills that fall under the strength domain, like athletics, you're just rolling for strength whenever you want to lift something or smash something or grapple something. However, instead of dexterity, Daggerheart gives us 2 stats: agility and finesse. Agility is described as sprint, leap, and maneuver, and finesse is defined as control, hide, and tinker. This is a nice change because now if you're playing a dex-based class, you're not automatically going to be good at everything. For example, in D&D, all monks are automatically good at picking locks, and all pickpockets are automatically good at parkour. You can be better at some things than others thanks to the way the skill system works, but anything dexterity-based is all grouped together by one stat. But in Daggerheart, you have to choose between either high finesse or high agility. And you can prioritize both over your other stats. We'll talk in a minute about how your stats are chosen in Daggerheart, but it means you're choosing both at the expense of other stats you could choose to raise higher instead. Now in D&D there are 3 physical stats, just like there are in Daggerheart, but the 3rd stat is Constitution, which is how you determine how many hit points you have in D&D. In Daggerheart, your stats don't impact your hit points. Your hit points are determined by your class. Bards have fewer hit points than Druids. Wizards have fewer hit points than Warriors. This is essentially the way Daggerheart makes sure each class feels like they have the right number of hit points based on the core fantasy of that archetype. You can't just put a bunch of points into Constitution and play an extremely hearty wizard. When you play a wizard, you're playing a character who only has a certain number of hit points compared to other classes. There's not a huge difference, and we'll talk more about hit points another day because that really does have to be its own video, but because hit points are determined by your class and not your Constitution score, the game doesn't really need a Constitution score anymore. So now our 3 physical stats are strength, agility, and finesse. Now in D&D, the 3 mental stats are intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. In Daggerheart, we have instinct, presence, and knowledge. Knowledge is Daggerheart's version of intelligence. The keywords are recall, analyze, and comprehend. Instinct takes the place of wisdom and is described as perceive, sense, and navigate. And instead of charisma, we have presence, defined as charm, perform, and deceive. And this is where I think we can really see the difference in the implications these terms carry. Because you don't have a low intelligence in Daggerheart, you have less knowledge. You don't have poor wisdom, you have poor instincts. And we no longer have to wonder whether charisma also equates to physical attractiveness, the way it did back in the day, back when they tried to figure out whether you needed a comeliness stat as well, because now it's just called presence, and so by definition it has nothing to do with your physical appearance. You can be as weird looking as you want and still be extremely captivating and engaging, like Walton Goggins. That's kind of the perfect example of someone who has extremely high presence. He's one of the greatest actors of our time, so it doesn't matter that he looks like a horse, because he has so much presence. Whenever he's on screen, it's like he's bottled lightning for all of us to watch. He's so good. Now in D&D, you select your stats through 3 possible ways: a standard array, a point buy method, or through random rolls. In Daggerheart though, it's just a standard array. You cannot roll poorly and get a whole bunch of bad stats in Daggerheart. You don't have to worry about getting an unplayable character. Every character is drawing on the same resource. It's just a matter of where you place your stats. However, with D&D, you roll 4d6s and drop the lowest result. So you get a number somewhere between 3 and 18. You do that 6 times and you place them where you want them, and those are your ability scores. But then you have to use those scores to find out what modifier you add to each of your rolls. So if your score is a 10 or 11, you don't add anything. 12 or 13, you add a +1. 14 or 15, you add a +2, and so on. The same goes for negatives. 8 or 9 is a -1, 6 or 7 is a -2, etc. Daggerheart gets rid of that weird middle step where you find a score and then use that to generate a modifier, and so now you just have 6 modifiers that you can place wherever you want. +2, +1, +1, 0, 0, -1. Now, it's never specifically stated in the book that 0 is the human average, the way it is with D&D, and we also don't specifically know what a +2 is compared to what a hypothetical +3 or a +4 would be. But in D&D, if you have a strength modifier of a +4 or a +5, you're basically the strongest human being in the world. Daggerheart doesn't really make it clear whether it's using that same system, or whether a 0 is average strength, a +1 is a professional weightlifter, and +2 is Hercules. And ultimately, I guess that's up to you to decide at the table. Is a +2 in Daggerheart the same as a +2 in D&D? Or is it closer to a +3 or a +4 or a +5? Basically, does Daggerheart not go as far as D&D? Does it not go up to 11? Or did they just make 10 louder? But there is one thing that's undeniable about this range of stats that your Daggerheart character can have. Your lowest stat is not as low as your highest stat is high. That was probably the most confusing way I could have phrased that. Okay, let's try again. You get 1 + 2... No, that makes it sound like I'm saying you have 3. No, you have a single +2, and you do not have a -2. You've got 2 + 1. Again, not 3, you understand. So 2 times... No, that's confusing too. You have +1 twice, and you have 2 zeros. Yeah, that one's easy. That one's straightforward. So when you have the single -1 modifier, it doesn't seem like you're terrible at something. You're just a little worse than the average of your scores. You only have 1 -1, and it's your lowest score. But your highest score is a +2. Your lowest score is not as low as your highest score is high. I just said the same thing again, but this time hopefully the context makes it clear what I meant. But here's why I think this matters. In Campaign 1 of Critical Role, Travis Willingham played Grog, the Goliath Barbarian. He had a crazy high strength score, but a very low intelligence score, an intelligence of 6, which meant his modifier was a -2. Now, we could argue whether, because Daggerheart ranges are smaller, the -1 in Daggerheart is essentially equivalent to a -2 in D&D, so you could hypothetically still put a -1 in your intelligence and play somebody as dumb as Grog. But he was, I think, the only character in the campaign who had a -2 to anything, except for Scanlan, who had a -2 to his wisdom. But in Daggerheart, everybody has 1 -1. Not 0, but a single -1. You don't have somebody like Grog who has this extremely low score that they have to figure out how they're going to roleplay in the game, because everybody has a score that low, and they're all putting it into something. So either everybody is agreeing that a -1 means you're comically bad at something, or your Daggerheart characters are just not going to be as bad at anything as Grog was with intelligence. You kind of can't play Grog Strongjaw in Daggerheart. And this is only part of the reason why. The first reason is that you don't have this comically low ability score because everybody shares the same modifiers. So if you decide that a -1 means you're incredibly bad at something, then that pretty much applies to everybody. Somebody who puts a -1 in their presence will fumble over their words constantly. Somebody with a -1 to their finesse would be dropping stuff constantly. Somebody with a -1 to their agility wouldn't be able to walk past a duck pond without falling into it. In fairness, all 3 of those are real things that happen to me in my everyday life, but I'm also not an adventuring superhero in an RPG. And also, I can edit my videos so you don't see how often I drop things or how often I get tongue-tied. Daggerheart gives 2... Agility is based on the core archetype. This is essentially the way Now, it's never specifically... Does Daggerheart not go up as far as D&D, or does it not go... Use some of these clips of me misspeaking in the section about how I can't talk. And because you only see me standing right here in this narrow little frame, you have no idea how often I fall over.
Are you okay? Ow. Are you okay? I don't know.
So unless everybody is comically bad at one of their 6 abilities, then it stands to reason that having a -1 to your knowledge does not mean that you're comically stupid. But that brings me to the second reason you can't really make Grog and Daggerheart. It's not intelligence anymore. It's knowledge. Here's the thing. A lot of people learned how to play D&D from watching Critical Role. That's part of the reason that show even exists, to show you how the game works. And a lot of people saw somebody like Travis playing a really dumb character because he had a low score, and they didn't just think that's how it's supposed to work. And honestly, we can't hang that entirely on Critical Role. That is a debate that's been playing out in D&D for a long, long time. It's something Matt Colville talked about in his video about people arguing about D&D back in the 70s, and I'll come back to that in a minute. The idea that you have to play a stupid character because your intelligence is low, and for no other reason. But a lot of people also saw how much fun Travis and the rest of his fellow players were having with the fact that he was playing a real big dummy. So then, when these viewers got to the game table themselves and happened to roll a low ability score and assigned it to their intelligence, a lot of those players wanted to play their low intelligence rolls as if they were as dumb as Grog. But most players are not Travis Willingham. A lot of players and game masters watching Critical Role took away the wrong lessons from watching Travis play that character. It's something I keep pointing out in my series where I go through every episode of Critical Role and talk about the lessons we can learn. I try to point out how often the choice to play Grog as stupid or illiterate or clueless is a decision made by Travis when he thinks it'll be the most fun, and it's rarely ever a penalty imposed upon him by Matt. I think the folks at Daggerheart know that they have a lot of Critical Role fans who are going to pick up their game, but most of them aren't freaks like me who are making a retrospective video series talking about every episode and rewatching it for clips and trying to figure out how the players pull off the fun shenanigans we remember so fondly and picking the episodes apart looking for lessons we can apply to our own games. I know I'm the exception. I know that most people saw that a really low ability score must mean you're really bad at something, and unless you're completely on the same page about what that means, the way Matt and Travis so often were, then I think learning that lesson and taking that approach to your D&D games can end up leading to a lot of friction, as players are basically told they can't accomplish certain things because they are too stupid because of their low scores. And suddenly something they thought could have been fun role-playing is now a penalty from the GM, or a source of friction from the other players who don't think they should play the character the way they are. And so for Critical Role's flagship game that is meant to replicate the way the cast plays their own games, they took away the option to have a score that is as low as one of the most famous low scores in any of their campaigns. And like I mentioned earlier, the idea that your character might be stupid has been a really contentious part of the hobby for decades. Earlier, I referenced Matt Colville's video about the arguments people have been having in this hobby ever since the 70s, and in that video he talked about the friction between players who wanted to play stupid characters who might just charge into every situation because they were big old dummies, and players who felt like that was essentially poor sportsmanship because they didn't want your role-playing to potentially get their character killed because you decided your character was too stupid to look for traps.
Keep your eyes sharp. There will be traps and they will be deadly.
The deadlier the traps, the richer the reward.
Just keep close.
Oh, don't want to trip on this. Found a trap.
I've played at the table with people who basically played their characters as oblivious doofuses, but that was a role-playing decision that sometimes had nothing to do with their stats. Certainly that was the case with one of the player characters in our old actual play show. Our human fighter had decent intelligence and wisdom, but his player's argument was that his character was a noble. He had been sheltered and pampered and had this narcissistic streak, so he played the character like kind of a dummy. And that was a role-playing decision that made sense for the character he wanted to play. And I want to be really clear, he played that character incredibly responsibly. He did not disrupt the games. I've played with other people who played characters who were dummies, and they really did kind of cause problems at the table with the way they played their game. They took away agency from other players by blindly going off and doing their own thing. That was not a problem for this human fighter noble. But still, for me, a Critical Role fan who at the time had only seen Travis playing Grog as a dummy specifically because of his low intelligence score, I had it in my head that our fighter shouldn't be a stupid character if his stats didn't line up with it. If you've got a 13 or 14 intelligence, why are you playing your entitled, selfish noble as an oblivious, pathetic idiot? Well, first of all, because entitled, selfish nobles do tend to be pretty oblivious and pathetic and idiotic. Actually, time is extremely kind to his interpretation. But second of all, the player had an idea for his character, and it didn't really have that much to do with how much his character knew about history or arcana or how good they were at investigating things. He could be good at all those things and still play a character who was really bad with social cues because it made the most sense for his upbringing. And because we were also kind of doing a comedy podcast, and he knew that a character like that was going to be a really great way to drive the action forward, which once again, he was absolutely right about. And now that I've sat with Critical Role for a lot longer, I've seen that you can get inspiration from your stats, but I think he was right. I don't think your stats should be the deciding factor in how intelligent your character is. They just reflect how much learning you've had. You can still decide how you want to navigate the world of the game, because that's the whole point of a role-playing game. And so the difference in Daggerheart is that your GM is, I think, a lot less likely to impose stupidity on you due to your stats, and the other players won't be as tempted to challenge you on the way you chose to play your character, because knowledge isn't intelligence. So playing someone who is kind of stupid is now just a character choice you have the freedom to make. The way it kind of always should have been. And if we're talking about Critical Role characters playing a low ability score, we have to talk about Keyleth. When Marisha made her character, she chose to put her lowest score into Charisma, because she knew she was going to be more tongue-tied than the other players because that's just who she is. It's something she knew she was going to wrestle with at the table. So by giving herself a low Charisma, she could have an excuse to explain her difficulty finding the right words. Now there was no pressure on her to find the right words because any issues she had while speaking could be explained by her low Charisma. And I realize that at first, this makes it seem like I'm making the opposite argument I just made. Isn't she playing a low charisma as if she's having trouble talking or convincing people to do things? But that's not really what happened. She already knew she wasn't the same sort of wordsmith as the other players at the table. But by giving herself a low charisma score, that was a choice to essentially rationalize her own struggles as a player at the table by pairing it with her lowest stat. But some audience members just could not accept that she would sometimes say stupid things or phrase things in an imperfect way. Because how could she do that if she had such a high wisdom score? I've gotten comments from people who were genuinely upset that Keyleth would say stupid things because having a high wisdom would make that impossible. Now, first of all, I think this is just an excuse given by people who just don't like Keyleth, or just don't like Marisha, at the very least during Campaign 1. And they basically latched onto this argument as their justification for why they didn't like her, because they had to believe that their dislike was logical and not emotional. And it's fine, you can dislike someone for an emotional reason, it doesn't have to be rational, who gives a shit? But there are still these people who basically believe that Keyleth said a lot of stupid stuff she shouldn't have said, and that she especially shouldn't have said them if she had such a high wisdom score. And, okay, second of all, I don't really agree that she did say a bunch of stupid stuff. There are a few things she says that I don't agree with, there are moments where I didn't understand what she was trying to say, but every player at that table has done that at some point during all their campaigns, probably more than once. And certainly there's no moment in the game where Keyleth said something that got under my skin, and definitely not the way it did with some of Marisha's haters. So that's the first really big caveat. These people believe Keyleth said a bunch of stupid stuff, and that's an argument I don't necessarily agree with. I'm sure some people will start listing examples in the comments of things Keyleth said that they thought were stupid, but I honestly don't care. Because the other half of this argument is that not only did she definitely say a bunch of stupid stuff, but she would never say all these stupid things because she had such a high wisdom score. And again, not only does not everybody think she said a bunch of stupid stuff, like clearly I don't, but also, even if we were to accept that framing and agree that she said stupid stuff all the time, we would still be setting aside the fact that these exceptional characters with remarkable stats are still played by human beings. I played a high-level wizard with a 20 in intelligence for a good chunk of our actual play campaign, and I was definitely playing it as actual intelligence rather than just having a lot of book learning. And I would still come up with plans and strategies that wound up being complete dog shit, because I'm a flawed player and a flawed human being. So if your argument is that a player would never make choices you consider to be mistakes because their character's stats are too high, again, I think you're making a logic leap I can't join you for. You've got to be able to account for human behavior and understand the fact that even if we accept your framing that a high wisdom means you would never say stupid things, even though talking would probably be covered by charisma, and so you could still say stupid things while also being wise because talking is covered by a different stat. But again, even if we agree that you're right about that part, I don't think it's a real problem. Because if you can't accept the fact that human beings are going to say or do things they might regret later on, or that you might not understand or agree with because we can't make mistakes because we're playing characters with really high stats, then you and I probably just have a lot of fundamental disagreements about how to play these games at all. And maybe you should consider being normal. But again, even if we take everything else they've said for granted, that Keyleth putting her foot in her mouth can't be explained by her low charisma, or that she should have worked harder to roleplay high wisdom by choosing her words more carefully in a way you would agree with, whatever that means, even if we set all of that aside, this argument still hinges on treating D&D's wisdom score the same way we use that term colloquially. This is only a problem if you think a high wisdom means you're Yoda, that you're literally right about everything because you're wise. And first of all, Yoda was wrong about a whole bunch of stuff in both the first two movies he was in, let alone a lot of prequel material, so having wisdom doesn't actually mean you're always right. And second of all, having a lot of wisdom doesn't mean you're good at talking. Moses from the Bible had trouble speaking and needed his brother Aaron to speak on his behalf. And Yoda... Come on. But once again, even if I did agree with all those arguments I just challenged, even if we were to still set all of this aside, I just don't think that's how the cast of Critical Role interpreted wisdom. And I know some people are going to bring up Scanlan as a counter-argument, and we'll touch on that in a minute. But at the very least, I think that's just not how Marisha interpreted her wisdom score. Marisha was very deliberately playing a character who didn't have all the answers. She was uncertain of herself and her skills. She was constantly second-guessing everything she did and the rest of the players did. She catastrophized every action they took, looking down the road at every single possible negative thing that could possibly happen as an outcome of that, it would actually paralyze her from making decisions in the moment. I don't think Marisha played Keyleth as if she was traditionally wise. And so to project that she was playing her high wisdom wrong sort of misunderstands how Marisha must have interpreted her wisdom score in the first place. Now, to be fair, the people making this argument against Marisha or Keyleth did not come up with the idea that this is how you're supposed to interpret wisdom in D&D. In earlier editions, this is explicitly what wisdom was. In 3.5, when your character aged, you lost points in strength, dexterity, and constitution, but gained points in intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. This is meant to reflect the fact that you do gain wisdom, in the classic sense of the word, as you get older, to reflect your life experience, making you smarter and more wise. But this also meant that your spot checks and listen checks got better, which meant as you got older, your eyesight and your hearing got better, which is, I would say, not especially accurate to the human experience. And that's probably a sign that pairing these skills with the idea of wisdom or intelligence is actually the problem, because those things don't have anything to do with each other. Having wisdom in the traditional sense of the word doesn't really make you better at listening to things. I mean, I guess it makes you better at active listening, but it certainly doesn't improve your eyesight or hearing. Also, your sense motive skill would improve as you got older, and just speaking personally, my grandparents got really bad at knowing when people were trying to scam them as they got older, so I actually don't feel like they got savvier as they got up in years. In fact, I would actually say I don't think they got wiser at all as they got older. I think that probably happened for a time. I have no doubt that they were smarter and more wise by the time they were 50 compared to when they were 25. But by the time they were in their 80s, they thought Obama was a secret Muslim communist who was going to make us all follow Sharia law. Not that they had any idea what that even meant. Let's be very clear about that. But they also were saying that Obama was going to do this in 2016 when he had already been the president for 8 years. When was he going to start turning the country into a Muslim fascist state or whatever they thought he was going to do? Was he only just going to finally get around to that in his last 100 days in office? So yeah, I would say I don't think 3rd edition quite understood how intelligence and wisdom map onto the experience of actually getting older. Now, if you've only played 5e and you don't have that experience of seeing how older editions of D&D literally tried to turn the concepts of intelligence and wisdom into game mechanics, and I think kind of missed the mark, then I think I could understand why you might get frustrated when somebody like Keyleth puts her foot in her mouth, because shouldn't she be wise enough to do that? But if you've been in this hobby for a while and you've seen other players and other editions of the game struggle with these concepts over the years, there's a decent chance you've come to realize that any issues you might have with Marisha's role-playing weren't because she wasn't playing her abilities correctly. It's because the ability scores names don't line up with really how they're intended to be used in 5e. Or, if they do, and you're actually meant to be intelligent or wise based on those skills, then we come back to the Grog problem, where a lot of groups just don't know how to handle that situation responsibly. So the solution for Darrington Press was just to choose a better word in the place of wisdom, one that does a better job summarizing how these players and designers imagine that this ability should be used. And what I especially love is that this essentially retroactively absolves Marisha of this criticism that she wasn't playing her character correctly. Daggerheart effectively makes the argument that D&D's stats were flawed, they never should have been called that, and they shouldn't have worked that way. I've seen people come into my comments of my Tiberius videos and argue that he was just playing his low wisdom when he did frustrating things at the table. And no, that's not how it works. His low wisdom definitely informed his choice for his character to be sort of absent-minded. I think it was absolutely a consideration when he was playing Tiberius. But having low stats doesn't absolve you of regulating your behavior at the table. Sam also played a character with a low wisdom score, and he never had those same moments of friction with the rest of the cast. And let's briefly talk about Scanlan, because he does come up from time to time in these discussions about how to play low scores, and how low scores are meant to be interpreted. In the final battle of Campaign 1, he basically said that the reason his character kept doing stupid things is because he had a low wisdom score. But this may not be a super popular opinion in the hobby, but I think he was joking. I don't agree with the argument that Sam was deliberately playing Scanlan with low wisdom, because Sam did a lot of really smart things as his character, and when he did things that I think people actually genuinely disagreed with, like when he fireballed townspeople instead of Vax, he often had his own internal logic behind them. You may not agree with that logic, but it was certainly well considered within the context of his character. He wasn't really saying, I'm going to do something reckless or foolish now because of my low wisdom score, here I go on shenanigans. He didn't let himself get hoodwinked in Ank'Harel because of his low wisdom score. He didn't try to pick up a drug habit because of his low wisdom score. That might have been a decent after-the-fact justification, but actually, I think when he implied his wisdom score was the reason Scanlan did stupid stuff, he was just joking. But I think the audience latched onto that idea because it lines up with how they thought low stats were supposed to work, based on how they'd seen Grog roleplay his low intelligence score, and arguably the way Marisha talked about Keyleth's low charisma. But I just don't think Sam was deliberately playing someone who was foolish. I think he was playing a complicated character, and sometimes that meant he would do things other people didn't agree with. But with the exception of something he did for the lulz, like pooping on beds, most of what he did in the game was not done for no reason. I think as the Critical Role campaigns went on, the players more or less dropped the idea that you were tethered to your lowest stats to dictate how you must behave at the table. It's fine to use low stats as inspiration to figure out more about your character's personality. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, whether you're doing it in D&D or Daggerheart. But I think the problem comes from when the other players or the game master, or in the case of Critical Role, the audience, effectively demand that you must behave a certain way because of your low stats, or that you can't behave a certain way because your stats aren't low enough. With Critical Role Campaign 2, we did have one of Talison's characters playing a character with low wisdom, and he found a good way to roleplay that. But I would also argue that Liam played his character in a way that didn't really line up with his high charisma, because he had an idea for his character that didn't necessarily jive with everyone's interpretation of what a high charisma character looks like. And that's completely valid because it's his character. He can roleplay it however he wants and also still be good at persuading people or deceiving people, even though I would say that not all of those were necessarily accurate to his character. He just happened to have better stats in those things than you might expect based on how he played the character. And look, if my argument here is that Critical Role does not play their games anymore in a way where they're dictated by their low ability scores, maybe that argument's going to fall apart a month from now when Campaign 4 starts and someone plays a character with low charisma and describes their character as ugly, stuttering, and rude because of their low ability score. I've already thrown out some bad predictions for that campaign that have been proven wrong. This might be another one of those. But when I look at Daggerheart, I essentially see a game system that's looking at 50 years of disagreements and just trying to sidestep them entirely for their own game. You don't have to worry about the idea that having low knowledge or low instincts means you have to play a dummy. Having low stats in Daggerheart just means there are some things you don't know. And while that still offers fertile ground enough for you to use it as a jumping off point if you're looking for inspiration for your character, it isn't prescriptive in the way D&D stats are viewed by some D&D players and by a lot of members of the Critical Role community. Now, another interesting thing about Marisha, especially during Campaign 1, is that she became a very proficient notes taker. By the end of that campaign, she had the most complete notes of anybody in the party, probably followed by Sam. And I do think it's kind of interesting that the two characters with the highest and lowest wisdom, respectively, were the best note takers. But they didn't take notes because it helped them play their characters more accurately or anything like that. They did that because they thought it was fun and because it helped them play the game a little better. But not every player has the attention span to actually be mindful enough to take notes during the game, and I don't think we should punish them when that's the case. It would be nice if our players remembered every proper noun we threw at them, but you are very unlikely to get a Marisha or a Sam at your table. More likely, your players showed up to just roll some dice and have some fun killing monsters. Maybe they will hyper-focus on the details of the plot lines they find the most interesting, but even then, there's no guarantee they'll be able to follow everything you throw at them. So, in my experience, when there is lore or mythology or information you want your players to keep track of, it's a lot more effective for you to present that information in a way where they can actually have access to it whenever they want. They don't have to write down every single thing you say at the table. You can just shoot them a link to a wiki-style article of the information you want to share with them, to take away that barrier for the players who want to take notes or want to keep track of things, but just aren't really able to focus enough in the moment to do that. And it's also tremendously helpful for you to have all that information consolidated into some articles that you can access at any point you want to, even for your own reference. And you can do all of that through today's sponsor, World Anvil. World Anvil is an incredibly robust online toolkit that you can use to create articles of anything in your game. Facts, politics, NPCs, monsters, prophecies, whatever's relevant to the game you're running, World Anvil has a way for you to make articles about them. Then you can share these links with your players. So if there's something that they want to argue their character would definitely remember because the character has a higher knowledge score than the player does, or they have an experience they can invoke that specifically helps them recall information, then they can just pull up these articles and refresh their memory about important world details right there at the table. And World Anvil has been a fantastic partner. I've been working with them for years, and they really are wonderful. And I'm currently making some major adjustments to my own campaign setting. I recently had a bit of an epiphany that unlocked a whole bunch of details about my own homebrew world, and I'll be making some videos about that pretty soon. But when I'm putting these details together and developing my world, I'm using World Anvil to do so, because it works so much better than my other system of just writing information down in Google Docs that I then have to try to search through at the table and hope that I'm getting the spelling right for whatever I came up with 2 weeks ago, or emailing myself reminders, which is not especially helpful when I do that with a whole bunch of other things in my life and they just kind of get lost in the shuffle, or writing things down in a little pocket notebook, which, again, is where I write lots of little reminders. So it doesn't make sense for me to have to flip through this at the game table where I'm also going to be met with reminders for future videos and chores I need to get done. So having everything in one dedicated service like World Anvil is just so nice. And I love that I can make these articles look nice and polished and professional, and then send these links to my players, which is Not exactly something I can do very easily with my Google Docs. And World Anvil is offering a discount to the viewers of this channel. If you visit worldanvil.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK at checkout, you can save 51% off of any annual membership. Once again, that is worldanvil.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK. Thank you so much to World Anvil for sponsoring this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed these 4 Daggerheart videos over these past couple weeks. These are videos I definitely wanted to make and did not just put out because I got cursed by an algorithm wizard. But now we've survived these videos, so tune in very soon for my next installment in my Critical Role Demystified series, where I talk about episode 80, which is all about the fight with the ancient green dragon Raishan. But this is not the last Daggerheart video I have planned. I have a whole bunch more I want to get to very soon. So if you want to see more Daggerheart videos mixed in with other D&D content I've got coming out soon, then make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you can get notified about new videos whenever they come out. Make sure to click right here to watch my video about how Daggerheart's dice work. I didn't put Matt Mercer's face in the thumbnail, so I'm going to guess it didn't do as well as my other Daggerheart videos so far. So go watch it and show it some love. I would really appreciate that. Until next time, play fair and have fun.